My love, can we go backwards, back to the days before the going got rough?
One recurring trope of love stories is the one that got away. The person who passed briefly through your life, leaving behind a very distinct imprint on the soul. They're not just someone we loved, they're someone we almost loved, or barely loved, or didn't love in time. Someone whose presence was more like a visitation, we might say, than a relationship. What's often left unsaid is that these stories rarely center around the actual person themselves. What haunts us is not the beloved per se, it's the feeling, the version of us that showed up in their presence. What got away was not just the person, but the part of us that seemed to burn brightest in their presence. This same pattern plays out not only with people, I would say, but with music. There's a song that I heard over 30 years ago. It's very short, about 2 minutes long, and I only heard it twice at the time. But every few months, when scrolling through Spotify in search of something that might scratch a certain kind of sonic itch, I might remember this song and try once again to find it. The problem is that the only detail I can recall of the song is that either the song title or the band name contains the word love in it, which in the world of pop music is about as useful as saying that it features pronouns like I or you in its lyrics. The song had been played for me by an Italian man named Michele in a small town near Milan called Casalpustalengo. He'd played it for me from an LP that he'd fished out of his collection, one he'd bought recently, if I remember, so most likely a 90s release, something in the vein of psychedelic soul with a bit of post-punk angularity, a hint of Red Hot Chili Peppers, a dash of the blues. Not really my hunting ground at the time, nor since, which is also perhaps why I lost sight of that song for the next 3 decades. The song and I moving in completely different socio-aesthetic circles, we might say. At the time, I was listening to bands like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Pavement, PJ Harvey, Elvis Costello, Ben Folds 5, what you might call the sort of brooding, bookish end of the alt-rock or indie spectrum. But I was also trying to understand the landscape of Italian music, especially the singer-songwriter greats of that genre. You know, Francesco De Gregori, Lucio Dalla, Fabrizio D'André, Paolo Conte, and others, which this song didn't really tap into either. Here was something clearly from another emotional universe, unfiltered, unguarded, almost too much, perhaps coming closest to that ecstatic, shimmering quality of someone like a Jeff Buckley or a Perry Farrell, but looser, more fractured, less Farrell, more feral, you could say.
Scioglie il sangue, rinde venere, rinde venere, rinde venere, rinde venere.
I was 20 years old when I first heard that song. I had dropped out of university the year before with mental health issues. Cambridge, as it turns out, not really being the best place for a shy, socially stunted, bookish kid who hadn't grown up in the milieu of lawn games and debating societies and rowing blazes and gap years in Nepal and double-barreled surnames and champagne smuggled into one's college rooms in cello cases. But more than that, it was the unshakable ease of the polished and upper classes, the moneyed and professionally preordained kids that I encountered at university. People who just somehow knew how to, I don't know, order wine and make small talk with the dons and navigate formal hall without sweating it. 18 and 19-year-olds who already seemed to be in rehearsal for those cabinet positions or for TED Talks, or I don't know, maybe writing that commission for the Royal Court Theatre, leadership retreats in Davos. What can I say? My psyche buckled under the strain of it all. I couldn't hack it. I envied them immensely, which is to say, hated their self-certainty, their sort of suave ambition and fluency. So I was nudged into a kind of dropout sabbatical year, and was fortunate enough, very fortunate, to find a job working as an English language assistant in this one-horse town that no one in the world, or Italy for that matter, had ever heard of, called Casalpustalengo. I also offered private English lessons to supplement the small stipend that I got from the school. And so this must have been one of my students, yes, who played me the song after we'd finished conjugating our verbs and working through whatever text we were struggling to make sense of. Okay, you say, but why then should this song follow you, shadow you, haunt you for the rest of your adult life? As I said, I was listening to a whole bunch of new music at the time, much of it more deliberately aligned with my tastes. Why should this one track, played only twice, leave such an imprint? Well, first of all, most obviously, I loved the song the first time I heard it, you know, coup de foudre, the secret chord that David played, which pleased the Lord, etc., etc. Love at first listen. And those are often the songs or people that we want to hold on to. In fact, I remember having enjoyed it so much that I even asked Michele to play it again, straight away, like, ooh, encore, encore, which of course, being Italian, he did. Afterwards, I probably wrote the name of the album down on a scrap of paper. I'm sure I must have done so. Who knows? In any case, for the next 30 years, until very recently, that song would resurface in my mind every few months whenever I found myself, you know, scrolling through Spotify or browsing YouTube late at night, chasing the ghost of that feeling that I'd had the first time round in the company of this song, wondering how I might find the song and thus the feeling again. The quest to find the song and the feeling of the song also reminds me of The Double Life of Veronique, that Krzysztof Kieslowski film that I'd very much loved and half understood when I first saw it at the Cambridge Arts Picture House Cinema around the same time. A similar sense of inexplicable recognition. Two lives that never quite meet, Polish Veronica and French Veronique, both played by the French-Swiss actress Irene Jacob, who portrays in the film a sort of doubling or double life, joined by tone, texture, and sensation. In the film, Veronique feels the absence of a woman that she's never known. She grieves her, grieves herself, grieves something inherently unnameable, following threads of feeling rather than logic, trying to find this other self who is also her, this salvationary soulmate who exists just out of reach, as if behind a veil, whose presence, though, makes the world feel fuller, sadder, more alive. Robert Bly writes about something similar in I and John, a book that I've returned to recently, also hailing from the early 1990s, which uses the image of a golden ball from the Grimm's fairy tale to denote the soul's original wholeness, bright, intact, and untouched by shame or time. In the Grimm tale, which is known as both I and Hans as well as I and John, this golden ball of unbroken being and light belongs to a young prince, his most treasured possession. One day, it rolls into the cage of a wild man named Iron John, who has been captured and locked away by his father, the king. The wild man refuses to return the ball unless the boy sets him free. And so begins the protagonist's descent. He steals the key from beneath his mother's pillow, releases the wild man, and follows him into the forest. Bly sees the ball as a symbol of the soul's original radiance, the luminous unity that we carry as children before this gets scattered by shame or gender training or trauma or just the weathering of time. The longing we feel as adults is not simply for the ball or what it represents. It's for that part of ourselves that once held it without fear or anger or shame. What we long for in these moments, the lost song, the remembered glance, the ungraspable self glimpsed through another, is not a person, not even a moment. It's a return of that golden ball, the thing we carried before we knew what it was, a wholeness that precedes explanation. In the diamond approach, this ache might be understood as the soul's remembrance of merging gold, the primordial sweetness of being wholly held and unjudged, unseparated, utterly safe. It's not a hunger for a person, but for a state of undivided presence where self and other dissolve in love. There's a scene early on in the Double Life of Veronique where Veronica, moved by the sound of a choir rehearsal, begins to sing along, and her voice is so striking that the conductor invites her to audition for a solo part in this prestigious upcoming concert that they're putting on. And as she sings, her face kind of lifts towards the rafters. Something close to ecstasy, but also pain, rapture, release, this almost unbearable intimacy with the music itself. It's not performance, but this more sexual one-on-one transmission that's happening. You know, watching her, you get the sense that what's leaving the body is not just sound, but her very soul, a kind of ectoplasmic pouring out. You know, the way that semen leaves the testicles in a kind of weird shudder, part ache, part release or relief, part surrender. But Kieslowski doesn't end in fusion. The story drifts gently into something quieter, more diffuse and translucent. A softening of will, which is to say, a willingness to live inside this mystery of the self without needing to hold on to it too tightly. This is where another quality begins to emerge, living daylight. Not the melting sweetness of merging union, but the gentle benevolence of being itself. Yet only when or if we are able to tune into it. Living daylight doesn't erase the ache, it gives it space to breathe, soften, take root. The soul no longer needs to merge, it can simply be. And in that being, the light that once seemed to come from the other, now comes from within. What reached me, I think, when I heard that song again after all those years away from it, wasn't just a memory, but more like a signal, a transmission, a sort of radiant trace of the real. It wasn't that I fell in love with the song once more, although I did. It was that something in me briefly became love once again, presence, light, remembrance, thanks to this song. So how did I eventually find the song, you ask? And also, let's hear it. Well, something shifted in my memory of the song, something not unlike the moment when Veronique, the French woman, we follow in the second half of the film, also played by Irene Jacob, sees her doppelganger, or her soul double, for the first time. It happens whilst her lover, this puppeteer who moves through life like one of his own creations, delicate, expressive, slightly outside the frame, he's looking through this contact sheet of photographs that she'd taken on a trip to Poland, some years before. Images that the French Veronique hadn't properly examined until that moment. And there, in the background of one frame, is the Polish Veronica, this other who is also her, at least archetypally, right? A sexual four, her very double. Just one image in a whole series of shots, but enough to stir something deep and mournful in Veronique. Likewise, some half-remembered glow on the edge of recall suddenly helped me to recognize that the hackneyed phrase wrapped around the word love in my memory was in fact that absurdly generic yet unmistakable I love you, and that either the name of the band or the title of the song corresponded to this utterance. And so, needless to say, we found each other again. The song itself is called The Lamb, and it was made by a short-lived, off-kilter LA rock group who went by the name of I Love You. The Lamb was released in 1991 as the final track on their debut album. So for the first time in 30 years, I was able to listen to that song once more, waiting to see what it might reveal of itself, or rather, what it might reveal of me, to me, this time round.
We shall overcome, girl gone on the line, living, giving in, people I be dealing time, swimming in a moonlit ocean, open pearly gate, I'll be sitting on with the lamb so soon as safe, for what it's worth, maybe she's elated in a stranglehold, half of blues like a wolf in a fold, heaven in my head, I'll be howling more, for you I'm cool. We shall overcome, Luther gone on the line, opening wings and a sing-song Savior's side, giving up all my heaven for a whirlpool girl in green, in peace we lie and watch clouds make scenes, for what it's worth, maybe she's elated in a stranglehold, half a blues like a wolf in a fold, heaven in my head, I'll be howling more, for you I'm cool. She wants the sun to hide the night, and I ain't gonna listen to reason, I'm gonna speak with my heart, on and ever ready, all out evil be together. We shall overcome, women got on the line, girl giving in, maybe I be feeling fine, swimming in a moonlit ocean, notion takes away, Abyssinian with the lamb, the flame is saved, for what it's worth, all tied up, our situation sucks, yeah, love shot shoot from me to you, for you I'm cool, for me she's cool.
So what was I listening to? And what have you now been listening to? What is this song about? Not just lyrically or even musically, but in its encapsulation of something or someone. Well, some very familiar ingredients here. Erotic longing, the howling, the ache, the surrender, a kind of desperate but joyful hunger, not just to be close, but to be transformed by the encounter. Longing married to salvation, we might say, hence much idealization of the other. You know, whirlpool girl in green, baby gonna give me wings, she wants the sun to hide the night. Not a person exactly, but a sort of living symbol, a kind of shimmering proxy. Not companionship in the everyday sense, but a vessel through which something within the realm of Eros might give us the presence that we're after and make us whole again. There's a sort of mystical devotion woven through it all. We shall overcome, not in protest, but as romantic invocation, a kind of spiritual act, as if love, or even the ache of love, might grant us access to another plane of being. The kind of gesture we find in Kieslowski's Veronica, you know, singing with her whole soul, not to perform per se, but to offer itself, herself, as if in doing so, some part of her might finally join the eternal. But on that path, of course, there is also emotional overwhelm. Heaven in my head, speak with my heart, have your blues like a wolf in a fold. The language of spiritual excess, where feeling exceeds containment. This is a lexicon of ecstasy, of the soul overflowing its vessel. It's a kind of expression that can be intoxicating, but also quite destabilizing, a state of ecstatic unraveling. We see something similar in Veronica, whose singing becomes not just a performance, but a kind of surrender. In the moment of her audition, she gives herself so fully to the music that her body becomes a sacral, luminous conduit, open, exposed, transfigured. It's this very excess, this ache to reach something beyond herself that eventually kills her. The sound that pours out of her is sublime, but also lethal. It draws from her not just emotion, but essence, as if the voice is not just an instrument, but a wound. And what emerges from that wound is a kind of sacred residue, not unlike semen or tears or ectoplasm. Not product, but trace. The body enduring something in order to reveal the soul, even if that revelation comes at the cost of losing it or herself altogether. And what about all that symbolic visionary imagery, you know, Abyssinian with the lamb, moonlit oceans, veils, gates, and transfigurative flames? Not necessarily meant to be understood, but again, felt. Imagery that bypasses meaning and goes straight to sensation. Something halfway between a Renaissance devotional painting and Afro-futurist mysticism. Think Caravaggio meets Kara Walker, or, you know, Veronica, head tilted back beneath the crumbling ceiling, dust raining down on her upturned face like grace. And threaded through it all, the logic of death and rebirth. We shall overcome, again and again, scenes of rupture, merging, letting go, of self-abandonment in love, giving up all my heaven, elated in a stranglehold. A bit like seeing one's soul reflected back to us in another's face, just for a second, and then losing it forever. So yeah, mystical longing, self-erasure in the service of fusion and passion, symbolic, abstract lyricism that resists literal meaning, eroticism as grief, as spirituality, as self-definition, and perhaps above all, a longing not to be alone, not in the usual sense, not lonely, rather alone in that deeper, more ontological sense, the feeling that there is no mirror, no echo, no matching resonance in the world. The song and the film are both whispering the same question. What if the ache doesn't mean that we're broken? What if it means that we remember something whole? And if so, what do we do with that kind of remembrance? There's a long-running program on BBC Radio 4 called Soul Music that's built a kind of archive of this phenomenon. Each episode focuses on a single piece of music, sometimes a pop song, sometimes a choral work or classical composition, and lets people speak about how this song changed them, how it broke them open, how it attached itself to some deep, often unnameable part of their lives. We've all had experiences like this, of a song that wasn't just memorable but formative, a song that held a part of us before we even knew it was truly ours. If you, as I did, fed that song then into GPT and asked what kind of person would be haunted by music like this, what kind of Enneagram pattern or Myers-Briggs type or attachment style or Jungian archetype might fit this song, you would find out soon enough. And the answer to this would be, well, it would be you, or rather the part of you that this song has never forgotten. As in, here's the song that holds my soul. Okay, you then say, but what kind of soul does that make you? The gift of the song, of Kieslowski's film, and the Enneagram, I would say, each in its way an uncanny transmission from the absolute or the beyond, is not only that they help us remember who we are, but that for a moment they relieve us of the burden of having to be ourselves.
So go, there's a world of changes, so many rivers still to get over, Rubicon still to cross, and I'll be picking up the pieces.
At the end of the film, Veronique, who has spent so much of the story suspended in feeling, unmoored by intuition, drawn towards something she cannot quite name, places her hand on the rough bark of a tree. Veronica, her double, her soul sister, had given herself over to ecstatic song and was destroyed by it, her ecstasy too much for her body to hold on to. Veronique, by contrast, stays, letting the mystery breathe beside and inside her, a presence as opposed to a rupture, not an escape from the self, but a kind of gentle return to its essence, its originating impulse and wound. Something grounded, something textured, something quietly alive. Not transcendence, but immanence, not rapture, but resonance, rhythm and root.
My love, can we go back to the days before the going got rough? I know there's no